So welcome to the Language Breakout. PBLA in your program may not look like PBLA in mine. Thank you everyone for being here at our first Settlement and Language AMSA provincial meeting. I would like to introduce our presenter to you, Joanne Pettis. Thank you so much for being here, Joanne. So Joanne has been a co-lead for IRCC's National PBLA project since 2009, when she was seconded from the Manitoba government's Adult Language Training Branch to develop and implement a new assessment protocol for federal LINC programs. In Manitoba, Joanne was the coordinator of curriculum development and implementation for the province, and in 2004, introduced collaborative language portfolio assessments through Manitoba's settlement, workplace, and ESP language training programs. This portfolio approach became the basis for PBLA. In addition to her work on PBLA, Joanne has worked with the Centre for Canadian Language Benchmarks since its inception. She co-authored the Canadian Language Benchmarks 2000 Guide to Implementation and was project manager for the Canadian Language Benchmarks 2000 ESL for Literacy Learners. More recently, Joanne was a contributing writer to the CLB 2012 Support Kit. Prior to working in government, Joanne taught at a variety of levels in a large adult ESL program. During that time, she was an hourly paid teacher with no benefits, raising her son as a single parent and often stressful under these conditions, as we can imagine. That experience shaped her advocacy for teachers throughout her career. Joanne retired from the Manitoba government in 2011, but continued to work on the PBLA initiative. She is currently taking another go at retirement. Taking a go, I guess are the key words, and stepped down from her position as PBLA co-lead in June. She is spending her time gardening, dabbling in arts and crafts, lolling at her cabin, and enjoying her 3-year-old great niece. However, her mind is not far from PBLA, and opportunities such as AMSA's provincial meeting continue to lure her back in to the PBLA fold. So please help me in welcoming Joanne Pettis here today. Thank you, Joanne.
Thanks, everyone. It's so nice to be here. I left a snowstorm in Winnipeg to get on the plane and fly out to the sun and the green. I wasn't disappointed to leave at all. It's delightful to be here, and I hope everybody has been having a good conference and that your day yesterday sounded like it was good. I hope today is also beneficial to you. My day started well. I discovered I'd put my pants on inside out this morning. I was very happy to find that out actually before I was standing up here in front of you. So I'm taking that as a good omen, and we'll proceed from there. Yeah, I probably could have gotten away with not saying anything, right? So in this session, we're going to look at some possibilities and practical strategies for shaping PBLA in your program, while remaining true to the PBLA fundamentals and principles and protocols. And I certainly, just before I get started, want to thank Julie and Farah and Krista and Javier for organizing my session at this event, because as Julie said, I can't completely step away from PBLA. So PBLA provides a principled, consistent, yet flexible approach to classroom-based language instruction and assessment aligned to the CLB. It's based on learner needs, relevant social situations, real-world language tasks, and CLB competencies. Those are really the CLB principles in that, those last 4 points there. When I was given the task of developing PBLA for IRCC, they told me they had 2 goals. First and foremost, and I was very pleased to hear this, they wanted to enhance student learning. That was their primary goal, to make it possible for students to learn better. They also wanted reliable assessment results, because without reliable data, they can't rationalize program decisions. They were confident that Link was doing a good job. They didn't have the data to show it. And the data that had been coming in for years and years had been coming in myriad forms, collected in all sorts of different ways. And they had realized that they couldn't use it to justify maintaining dollars in the system. So they had those 2 goals. They wanted to be able to tell the story of Link. They wanted to be able to enhance student learning. But I went down there with an agenda, too. I had a number of things that I wanted to do. I wanted a system that was flexible, so that teachers with seniors or teachers with parents with kids could teach their students relevant language, content, and skills. I also didn't want to tell teachers how to teach. I came out of the classroom. I know that every teacher teaches in their own way. They organize the lessons in ways that make sense to them. I didn't want to interfere with that. I always hated it when people came in and said, this is what you have to teach and this is how you have to teach it, and I want you to use this lesson plan. Never worked for me. And one of the reasons I got into kind of administrative pieces was I thought, okay, if there are going to be decisions made about what I'm going to have to do, I'm going to be part of that decision-making process. I wanted to enhance teacher expertise. I wanted to increase their employability. I wanted to help them develop professional expertise, and I wanted to see that it was done, hopefully, on paid time. I wanted to keep Link dollars in the program to benefit the programs and the teachers, rather than having dollars be taken out of Link to go to some test developers, outside test developers, to develop some monolithic testing system. I wanted to keep the dollars in the program. So those are some of the things that guided my approach to developing PBLA and continue to influence my thinking as we go forward. Now you see in the description up here that I've added in a phrase. I've got a flexible approach to classroom-based language, and I've put in instruction. I went down to develop an assessment model. Assessment has to be linked to instruction. So we ended up having to step back and propose an approach to instruction, which was really a curriculum framework that was developed to support PBLA. It was kind of a bass-backwards approach, but that was what the situation required. There were implications for instruction. Obviously, it's task-based instruction, because assessment is task-based. And you have to be teaching in a way that you're going to assess. We say consistent. We don't say uniform. We don't say identical. It's the intention of PBLA to provide programs and teachers with clear expectations and specific non-negotiables or must-haves, yet provide room for flexibility in how these must-haves are implemented. So in the session today, we're going to identify those must-haves. We're going to explore some strategies to address some identified challenges. Julie was very good about sharing some challenges that have been raised to AMSA, and so I've used those as the basis for this part of the session. And we're also going to look at some aspects of a new practice review framework that's going to be introduced in BC next year, 2018. You'll be introduced to it, and then you'll have a big lead time to implement it. But I want to give you a heads up on it, because I think it might help you as you work towards implementation, as you're working on implementation and moving through the growth of PBLA in your programs, and this might help you and reassure you that you're on track. So that's where I'm going today. So these are the must-haves in PBLA pedagogically. You need to have planning for instruction. I think this is one of the newer aspects of PBLA for a number of teachers. They're used to doing lesson planning, like day-to-day planning, but maybe they weren't used to planning at a broader level. The level of the blueprint, what you're going to teach, identifying what you're going to teach before you decide how you're going to teach it. So that planning for instruction is critical. Task-based module planning based on identified student needs. So the module plan really specifies what teachers are going to teach, and it's shareable, right? I mean, teachers in Benchmark 3 in different classrooms and different programs can use the same module plan because it identifies just what you're going to teach, but teachers can still really personalize the how-to, the day-to-day lesson planning on how they're going to do that. And the module planning and instruction focuses on language tasks students need to be able to carry out in specific social situations that are important to them. So that learner-centered planning is really critical. And you know, this is a bit of an aside, there are two different approaches to task-based instruction in the literature. And a lot of task-based instruction that you read about is a methodological approach. It's a way of teaching. But when we talk about task-based instruction in PBLA, it's kind of the second model of task-based instruction, which is a model of curriculum planning. And it's a planning approach that focuses on specific language tasks. So there's two different models, and sometimes people don't realize that they're two different models. And in PBLA, we're always talking about the curriculum planning model of task-based instruction. So these are the must-haves. In the portfolio, there needs to be a needs assessment, a goal statement, CLB levels the students are coming in with, an autobiography, and 8 to 10 artifacts aligned to CLB competencies in each skill area. And those artifacts can be formal assessment tasks that have been designed and implemented by the teacher. They can also be skill-using activities. I use SU when I'm talking about skill-using. Skill-using activities, I know a lot of you are administrators and may not have some of the jargon tripping off your tongue. Skill-building activities focus on building discrete skills like grammar skills or vocabulary skills, pronunciation skills. Skill using are like rehearsals. They're like the real world role plays, the real world application of all those discrete skill building pieces, right? So your teachers can put skill using activities as well as assessment tasks into their portfolios. And they can also do peer assessment. So there's a range of ways that students add to their portfolios. And I think some teachers think they can only put in formal assessment tasks. And we're saying, no, there's a much broader range than that. And then, of course, the PBLA also has the progress reports or the conference summaries. So those are the must-haves. And while we say you have to have these things, but you figure out what they are going to look like in your classroom, in your program. We really want teachers to be thinking, okay, I got a benchmark 1, I have to do a needs assessment. What's it going to look like in my classroom? I'm not going to use the same tool or approach that they are in the benchmark 6 class, right? So one of the problems, and I've kind of set this up as wicked problems, one of the problems that teachers sometimes complain about is that the needs assessments are difficult to carry out at low benchmark levels or in ESL literacy classes. And that even at other levels, right, they may take a long time. And I've heard teachers also say, we do our needs assessment and my student population turns over. I haven't got the same group of students in front of me as I had at the beginning of the year. And so, yeah, legitimate concerns. I encourage teachers to focus their needs assessment on where their learners need English, on the social situations. I looked at a portfolio a while ago, had an 8-page needs assessment in it. And I thought, where in the, I mean, how long, how many months did this take you to do? Because the teacher was looking at things like, how do you like to learn? Do you like to learn independently? Do you like to learn with others? What skills do you want to focus on? Do you like to learn grammar? Do you like to, all those kinds of things. And while that may be interesting, it's not really helpful to you in the planning of your instruction. What you want your teachers to get at is what are the key social situations they need to use English in their lives, and focus on helping them develop the skills for those social situations. Part of this came out of an experience I had teaching a community-based class of Vietnamese women. They were sewing machine workers in the daytime, and then they came to classes in the evening. And I spent inordinate amount of time, but some very, very good lessons on teaching my students how to make doctor's appointments. They were sort of at that benchmark 2, 3 kind of level. And we did some wonderful activities and lots of role plays, and I brought in, you know, all sorts of things we could manipulate and use, and I was quite proud of myself until I found out that they all had doctors that spoke their language. And they probably could have used spending that time on something that was more relevant to them. I had just decided, without assessing their needs, that this would be a really useful topic, right? And so so that really changed my approach to making sure I was really understanding. They have such limited time. I was really understanding, where do they need English? What do they need to be able to do in those situations? Who do they need to communicate with? So there's that difference between needs and preferences. Yes, you maybe like to do a lot of reading or writing, but that's not going to help me because I'm going to decide about the reading and writing you're going to do, but I need to know what English you need to learn to do. I encourage teachers to maybe do a general needs assessment at the beginning of the year with the class in front of them, and then do an additional needs assessment periodically, maybe before each new module. Just do a double check on what you need to learn related to this topic. And that keeps it relevant to the students in front of them. And as the student population changes, you still capture what the needs are. Certainly with low levels, make sure your teachers are using pictorial needs assessment with ESL literacy, and I would say benchmark 1 to 3, maybe even benchmark 4. Pictorial needs assessment are really valuable and more meaningful than a word-based one. We don't want to turn the needs assessment, we don't want to bog them down in a language that they can't access. Use pictorial needs assessment. And have teachers simplify the choices for ESL literacy. One of my colleagues, Svetlana Lepasko, teaches ESL literacy, and she would, with really, really low ESL literacy students, give them 2 choices. Their needs assessment would be, do you want to learn English for going to the store? Do you want to learn English for going to the doctor, right? She would simplify the choices to just a couple of, and that made it more accessible and manageable for students. So encourage your teachers to look at how they can make these steps work with the group of students that they have with them. Another wicked problem. We say that one of the goals of PBLA is to enhance learning. And however, I've heard teachers complain that all they do now is assess, 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 assess. There's no time for teaching anymore. All I'm doing is assessing. And what I'm recommending that you encourage teachers to take a breath and slow down. I think what we often find is that teachers are trying to pack assessment into what they've always been doing. They're trying to compress the process so that they're not spending any more time on, say, a particular module. They're just trying to cram it all in and get the assessments done. The focus in PBLA is to enhance learning. That means you have to teach. You have to be creative. The teachers have to use all that creativity that they have traditionally used to teach the students the language skills they need. And then when they feel comfortable that their students have acquired the skills they've been teaching, then assess. So, really encourage your teachers not to, if they feel they're too rushed and they're trying to assess all the time, tell them to focus on the instruction and add the assessment on after they've done the instruction. Assessment follows teaching. So teachers may spend longer on a unit or a module because they're going to spend the time they did before teaching, and then they're going to add on the assessment piece. So they may do fewer modules, address fewer topics, but hopefully the students will get more out of the process. So this is just a little bit. So what we teachers typically before would teach a module, then they go on and teach the next module and teach the next module. At the end of the term or at the end of the year, they would do a bank of assessments or tests, right? And roll up the results. And now we're saying, okay, take the module and then add on the assessment piece. Take the next module, add on the assessment piece. So don't let people pressure your teachers into compressing the process. The students are not going to learn faster because you teach faster. The students are going to learn because you take the time. You give them the time to practice and address the skills. So if you find a teacher is saying, all I'm doing is assessing, and just say, okay, well, just slow it down. Slow it down. Focus on your teaching, incorporate the assessment in a way that makes sense for the pace of your students. Here's another problem that we certainly hear in Manitoba, and I know you hear in BC also. Small programs, rural programs, frequently offer a continuous intake program. They may have a limited number of classes. Students kind of join whenever. Class is typically multi-level. We have had some teachers have come to me and said, I've got benchmark 1 to 7 in my class. How do I do PBLA? And my thought is kind of, well, after you shoot yourself. That's a class of benchmark 1 to 7 is, it's not conducive for learning, right? Aside from PBLA, this is not a good situation for language learning. How can the teacher possibly address the needs of all those students, right? So it's extremely challenging. So I think as administrators, this is really probably one of the biggest challenges you may have is how can you create conditions for success for PBLA, but not just for PBLA, for just language learning of your students. How can you manage that? So look at things like managing intake. New students doesn't matter when they register, they only start on Monday. It doesn't matter, you try and see if you can cluster students. Maybe instead of one class that meets 4 evenings a week, you divide it into 2 groups, have stage 1 students that come 2 nights a week, and the higher levels come a different set of 2 nights a week. But look at things like that where you can limit the number of levels in the class, if possible. Another one is teachers talk about is developing assessment tasks, finding materials. So encourage your teachers to collaborate with colleagues. I think that's one of the strengths of PBLA. It really does encourage collaboration. Assessment tasks like module plans are shareable. I also want to remind, we often have teachers say it's too difficult developing rubrics. I don't know if you hear any of your teachers complaining about rubrics. And PBLA doesn't require rubrics for a formal assessment task. It requires an assessment tool. And one other problem here, the progress point, and the report, and the conference summary. Some teachers are using the conference summary to put comments like, you don't have enough artifacts in your portfolio, so I can't give you a new benchmark level, but you're really working at a higher benchmark level. So my big comment there is, yikes! Don't let them do that, right? Don't let them do that. If they're working at a higher level, they should be able to demonstrate that and record it on a progress report. At higher levels, some real-world tasks may be longer and more complex. So encourage teachers to break them down into their relevant components, right? So that an outline for an essay, notes from researching a subject online, instructions related to reading or writing tasks, those can all be broken down into individual tasks that can be addressed in the 4 skill areas. So those are just a few different ways that you can help teachers look at how they can address the needs for PBLA. How can they address those must-haves? And I really encourage you to get teachers to think outside the box. Part of why I was able to step back from being a coordinator for the national initiative was because we're really moving from that implementation phase of PBLA into the sustainability of PBLA. And some of your programs are still early in the implementation phase, but little by little we're moving into what do we need to do to sustain the initiative over time, maintain its integrity over time, address things that have been identified and enhance the supports and resources that are available across the system. So one of the things that we've worked on over the last year or so was to develop a practice review framework. As I mentioned earlier, it's going to be coming to you probably next September, just in terms of being introduced to you. But you will have time to work to look at it and to plan how you're going to implement it before you're actually required to use it. Sustainability really requires a shared responsibility. When IRCC first talked to us about developing a sustainability model, I think they were really looking at something that settlement officers could use to come to programs and monitor how things are going, right? But Tara Holmes was the other co-lead. We really had another initiative, another idea in mind, because we wanted to ensure accountability across all the levels of stakeholders, not just the classroom teachers or the lead teachers or the programs, but the settlement officers themselves and even the national policy developers. So we took that approach when we developed the framework. We also wanted to make sure that there was a consistency between what we were trying to do in PBLA and what this framework looked like. So we wanted it to be based on standards. We wanted it to have shared responsibility. We wanted it to be transparent. We wanted it to be a growth model. We wanted to see some of our assessment for learning principles applied. So we have standards that have been developed for 4 groups: teachers, programs, local authorities, and the national authorities. We wanted to apply the assessment for learning principles, just like PBLA. The framework's based on a set of shared principles and strategies related to assessment, things like reflection, self-assessment, goal setting. We wanted it to be collaborative and transparent, and we wanted it to provide continuous feedback loops and a review process, so the framework and the processes themselves can be improved as we go forward. One of the key features of the framework is the notion of standards, and the notion of standards that we've used in the framework. The standards that are identified are meant to be practices to aspire to. They're not lines in the sand, right? We're really looking at this as a continuous learning model. So keep that in mind. They're practices to aspire to. They're descriptions of what quality looks like and what we're aiming towards. It recognizes that we're working towards these standards and there's always room to improve. And to that end, the classroom and the program practice standards include self-assessment and goal setting processes that focus on identifying strengths, what's working well, and what are some areas of improvement. It's pretty hard to read, but you've got the packages in front of you. So the classroom practice self-assessment framework asks teachers to place themselves on a 5-point scale related to each of the items, each of the standards that we've outlined. And there's not a huge number of standards. I think there's like 5 or 6, right? One is it's not part of my practice yet. And 5 is it's a consistent part of my teaching practice. Now, you'll remember that when you started the implementation package, the workshops that you did to introduce PBLA to your teachers, they started out by doing a self-assessment of sort of what their readiness was for PBLA. That self-assessment is actually the basis for the classroom practice checklist. So it'll be familiar to your teachers. For all teachers, there'll be aspects of practice that they want to improve. And it may be that they're not using a practice consistently, so they put themselves as a 3 or 4. Could be they're using a practice consistently, such as providing action-oriented feedback, but they want to improve the types of comments that they provide. At the end of the checklist, teachers are asked to identify something that's working very well for them, and then identify just 1 or 2 things that they want to work on, that they want to enhance, that they want to get better on. And then they're going to develop an action plan. What action will they take to enhance those practices? And what's their timeline? How long do they think they need in order to do it? And what supports do they think they need? So you've got the package there. You can see the self-assessment checklists. They're also going to be uploaded on Tutela and in a fillable format to support the paperless environment. So what I'd like you to do is just take a minute here and take a look at the classroom practice standards. Choose one of the standards and review the indicators. What you know about PBLA, if you're able to talk about how consistent they are with PBLA practice, but just take a look at the standards and with your table mates there, talk about how, as an administrator, that information might help you support and monitor PBLA implementation in your program. So there was a question, can you hear me with this if I talk? There was a question about, are the standards consistent with PBLA practice? And yeah, we really took a look at the sort of the must-haves, right, in PBLA, and what good practice would mean related to that standard, and that's what we've put down as the indicators. So, you know, for a lot of people it was, well, what do you mean by this? Let me see if I can take a look at one of them. Planning for instruction and assessment based on learner-identified needs, right? So we've got that kind of global standard, but what does that mean? What would you be looking for? What would the teacher be looking for in their own practice to decide if they're meeting that standard, if they're working toward that standard, right? So do your students participate in a needs assessment? Yeah, my students do a needs assessment. Is the needs assessment appropriate for the level of the learners? Right? So these indicators are all the kinds of things that would tell you and tell them whether or not their practice is meeting the standard. So hopefully they'll be really useful for the teachers themselves, but also useful for you. So this is how the process would kind of work for the teachers participating in the practice review. First, individually, they would complete the self-assessment. So they would use the standards and those indicators to make some self-assessment about where they are in the process. Are they always doing this, or are there some things that, oops, they're not quite there yet? So they do that individually. Then the classroom teachers were recommending that the classroom teachers come together collectively with their colleagues to share their action plans. So the teachers do the self-assessment and complete the action plan. Then they meet with their colleagues to share what their action plans are, what things they want to work on, how they think they're going to get there and by when. And they discuss that, and that might influence some of the, you get ideas from each other, so that might help teachers tweak their action plans. And then the teachers will submit their action plans to their administration. They're not going to submit the self-assessments. The self-assessments are for them, but the teachers are going to submit their action plans. This is what I think I'm doing well. These are the 2 areas I've identified that I want to work toward, and this is how I think I'm going to get there. And those action plans will feed into the program planning process. It'll help you do PD planning, for instance. I mean, you can see what the needs and what the intents are. And it'll also help you inform the practice review process at the program level. There'll also be I forget that I had these parts. And then they'll complete a feedback survey. And in our discussions with IRCC, they've agreed that classes could be canceled for teachers to come together to work through that collaborative process. So with the group session, when they meet and share their action plans, that might be done in conjunction with a different a meeting or something, but it should be done by canceling classes or something like that, so that they're on paid time. Lead teachers are involved in the process too. They'll complete a short self-assessment related to, not just to their classroom role, but their lead teacher role. They too will develop an action plan related to their lead teacher role. And then they'll meet with the administrator also to work out a plan for achieving those goals, and also do a feedback survey. So then the program practice standards is also a checklist that uses the same 5-point scale. And in completing the self-assessment, it may be the case that a particular standard is a consistent feature of one part of your program, but maybe not the entire program. For example, daytime classes are maybe a single level, but we still have multi-level classes on Saturday. So we might assign ourselves a 4 or 5 and look at the degree to which we can reduce the range of levels in a class. So with the program practice review process, the administrator will complete the documentation to support standards 1 and 4, which are program supports for PBLA. You can take a look at those. We're suggesting a spreadsheet to document the evidence for standards 1 to 4. However, some of the evidence you may already be capturing for other reports that you submit to IRCC, and if that's the case, you can just refer to that documentation. We don't want you doing things twice. I know you've got a lot of extra time on your hands. You're not busy people, so we thought about getting you to do everything twice, but we thought we decided maybe it'd be more logical to try and minimize your workload. The administrators complete a self-assessment for standards 2 and 3, which are pedagogic aspects of PBLA, based on the administrator's regular class visits. We're really encouraging you to get into the classroom. Even if you're not a teacher and you think, well, how can I tell what's going on? The more you're in the classroom, the more you start to recognize good practice. And if you remember, the PBLA guide has a section in the administrator's piece on walkthroughs and some things to look for and some questions to ask. And so they can support your visits. So you'll complete the aspects based on your regular class visits, your conversations with your learners, reviews of portfolios. Look at the portfolios, see what's going in there, the completed progress reports, and the review of the teacher action plans. And then you'll, as administrator, identify an action plan that identifies the things that are working well in your program and the things that you want to try and address. Administrators will share the program action plan with the settlement officers in advance of the monitoring visits. So I'll give you just a minute here to take a look at the standards, the program practice standards, and just take a look at how is this going to fit into your program? How will this support you as an administrator implementing PBLA? And how can you use this to support your teachers and also make sure you are on track with PBLA implementation? So you may have the PBLA guide, the IRCC guidelines, but anyway, we only have a few minutes here, so just take a look at the standards and see what you think of them as a program administrator, and how will this help you enhance your program. Certainly one of the things that we put into the program standards and into the settlement officers' work were aspects that we think are critical to PBLA success, like the range of benchmark levels in a class, the size of the class, the preparation time, the prep time that teachers have. There's a huge range of prep times provided to teachers across this country in LINC. And some teachers get lots of prep time and some teachers don't get any prep time. And that's obviously not IRCC, because they don't go to one program and say, well, we're going to give your teachers an hour a day and we're going to not give this program anything. That's not an IRCC decision. It's the programs, what they submit to provide in their proposals that really impacts whether your teachers get prep time or not. So there was a pilot done with the practice review framework. we looked at like 5 programs, I believe it was. We got 100 respondents, the classroom teachers, lead teachers, administrators, and the settlement officers. Interestingly, the settlement officers were thrilled with this framework because it gave them, they're monitoring programs and they don't have a clue what they should be looking at other than the dollars. And so this gave them a structure for looking at, how do I know if this program is doing well, other than the administrator is telling me, yeah, we're doing great, we're doing everything perfectly. We're a model program. Oh, okay then. I won't look at anything. Who would hire a painter for their house and say, I want you to paint my house, but I'm not going to tell you what color, and I'm not going to look at it before I pay you. I'm just going to ask you to tell me if it's a good job, So this gave them some structure for sitting down with the administrators and helping them to understand your program and your clientele and your particular challenges and how you're trying to reach them. So the vast majority of the respondents really liked the framework because they felt it wasn't punitive, right? It was really intended to be a growth model. We're always looking at assessment for learning, and we really wanted this framework to be an assessment for learning and for improving. So this is what one of the participants said about the process. So I think that once you're engaged in it with your teachers, you'll really find it I hope you'll find it a useful tool, and especially because it's not all on you and your teachers, but it engages the settlement officers, and we also are taking it'll be taken back to the national policy people to say, okay, you want this kind of quality instruction in your programs, you have to make sure that the conditions and the supports are in place to make that happen. My experience working with NHQ in Ottawa is they really want to understand and do a good job for you. They want quality programs, and I found them to be very open, really ready to learn about the system and what they can do to enhance it. There are always going to be realities around funding, right? But they have been consistently supportive and encouraging. When I worked with the director, I'd go in and I'd say, look, we have to do this with PBLA. And I'd explain, and he'd look at me, and then he'd say, go for it. So it was a wonderful group of people to work with. So I believe their hearts and minds are in the right place as long as we keep informing them and keep telling them what the realities are in the programs and in the classrooms. Here are a few tips. Again, just like PBLA itself, we're not looking for perfection. We're looking at always moving forward from where we are now. Really focus on the strengths. Mary at the back, I had a wonderful conversation last night with Mary, who was telling me about her approach she takes to giving feedback to learners on writing. And she highlights the things they're doing well. So the highlights on the paper are all what they're doing well, and things that aren't highlighted are the areas that need work, and then the students can look at those unhighlighted pieces and figure out what they need to do to enhance it. And I love that because it was such a positive approach to focusing on strengths. And so I really encourage you to take the opportunity to do that with PBLA implementation. If your teachers are discouraged, step back and say, okay, let's look at what you've got going for you, what you're doing right now, and let's move on step by step from there. Look at what opportunities you have for professional development around the areas, again, the identified needs of your teacher. Just like we're looking at the identified needs of students for building instruction, what are the identified needs of your teachers? Really talk to your teachers about the purpose of the framework, that it really is something to help them enhance their practice. and keep the communication loops going. When you get information from them, report back to your staff about, okay, this is the information you gave me, and this is how we're going to be using that to move forward in our program. The settlement officers will review the evidence related to the conditions and supports for teachers. They're really going to be looking at that. They'll be reviewing the program's action plans and how you intend to move forward. They'll conduct site visits. So this is going to be, if they don't do this already, I think a lot of them come to your programs, but they may just sit in your office and look at the numbers, the dollars, right? Not all of them actually go out and visit classrooms, and we're really encouraging them to get into the classrooms with you to see what's actually happening. They'll meet with the program administrative team to discuss the review. They'll complete feedback surveys, as do the administrators. The settlement officers will have the same framework as the program administrators do. So they'll be looking at the same standards in terms of what are they doing to support the programs and meeting these standards. That's really the goal. So this is what we've heard through the field test, that it really helped programs identify the strengths. It was reassuring to them. They could see where they were on track and where there were maybe some gaps that they wanted to look at. It helped the settlement officers see below the surface, they said, of the program, and to really begin to understand the challenges. In particular, I talked to an administrator last night that was saying, like, you know, there's a big chunk of her student body are shift workers. So they're all in class for 6 weeks, and then they're not in class for 6 weeks. And the impact on attendance, and how does it, how can they talk to IRCC about that? That's a reality of their program. So I think this process can really open up lots of opportunity for engagement in the issues that are on the ground and that you're addressing. So the emerging practice guidelines in their entirety are at that site. I encourage you to start looking at them now so that you can start to think about your program and how you're doing along get a sort of head on the game there. But they're not going to be coming to BC until September 2018, and then there'll be a period of time where you're looking at how you're going to implement the process in your program. Stay in touch with the implementation forums that you've all had access to, and make sure you're in touch with the various updates. We send out updates, sometimes they don't get read, and I know you're all busy, but at least put them in a binder or someplace where you can go back to them.
We do have some time for question and answers now,
Yeah.
if you're ready to take some of those,
Sure,
Joanne.
for sure.
Okay, thank you so much for that presentation, Joanne. We have a microphone in the middle of the room, and I can also pass around this roving mic. So if you have a question, we have about 10 minutes.
And Julie, I just want to say, I don't always have the answer, but I always have an opinion. And so take that for what it is. But I'm always happy to help you try and brainstorm some solutions to situations that are challenging you. So from either the first part of the session or the second part, if anybody has any questions they want to ask, or something, entirely different.
So what do you suggest the alternative is? They don't have the artifacts, but they're at a higher level.
So I think you're combining a couple of things there. So one you're combining is the notion of how students at higher levels can get sufficient artifacts by breaking the tasks down into incremental pieces. So that was one piece. Yeah. But the other section was around the progress reports. Yes, and you really, if you're going to say that someone has achieved a benchmark level, you have to have the evidence. You have to have the evidence. So it really means the teachers have got to find ways of getting the artifacts there. And that's where breaking down big tasks, like essay writing. Some people at benchmark 7 or 8, they're helping students write resumes, or they're helping them do presentations using PowerPoint decks. So take the process that they go through to do a presentation and break it down into its pieces.
So you do that for individual students? Because not everybody's at a higher level, just some of the students in the class are, right? So some of they're all, say, Link 6 students, right? But some of them are significantly higher levels, right? And they've come into your class and they don't have the artifacts, but they're already at a higher level, right? So you take them individually and break down the assessments? You can't do it for the whole class as a whole, right?
I'm having a little difficulty understanding what you're saying
Maybe
here.
I misunderstood what you presented. Go ahead.
I think she's talking about learner placement.
Yeah.
Okay.
It actually places a student into a higher level.
Yes,
Without
for
the
sure.
artifacts. Yeah?
Yeah, we really talk about, there's a difference between placing a student in a class that's appropriate for them and giving them a certificate of achievement, or saying they've achieved a benchmark level.
Thank you.
Right? So yes, for sure, that if you've got a student that it says they're a benchmark 6, but you know they're probably at a higher level, then put them in a class that addresses their needs. Get the artifacts in place eventually to show what level they have achieved, but put them in a class that meets their needs. So there really is a difference between placement and achievement level.
So I think
I'm still
Todd,
not clear when you say put the artifacts in place. So if we don't have them yet, how do you move them to that
When
level?
I say I mean do activities that create the artifacts, right? So as you're going through instruction, you have to create the opportunity. Your teachers have got to do the assessment tasks, or capture the skill using activities, or have them do peer assessments. So the teachers really have to look for increased opportunities to generate artifacts.
Thank you. Thanks.
so Todd has a comment, I believe, and then we also have a question from Nina. Do you still
Okay.
have a question, Nina?
Let me try,
Okay, so
just
please
before
go
we
ahead.
go on, I just wanted to come back. Let you and I talk at another time, because I think we're both kind of not quite on the same line there. Okay.
This is related to the previous question, and this is a challenge that we're finding is we have some students who, they're younger, they were placed in the right class, but they're, in addition to studying in our program, they're studying somewhere else. And perhaps, for example, they might be studying at the college, or they might be studying at home. Their sponsors are giving them assistance, tutoring, etc. So they don't have enough assessments yet. They might have 4 or 5 in each skill area, but they're clearly performing at the higher level. So it's too late to just redesignate them to place them in a different class, but it's too soon to, there's not enough evidence.
Yeah.
The issue is that the student is getting very frustrated and demanding that they move up. And we don't want them to drop out, but
Yeah, for
it's
sure.
kind of getting to that point.
And that's a challenge for a number of teachers, that the students are working in English-speaking environments or whatever, and their progress they're really clipping along. They're clipping along. So, I encourage teachers to look at, are there contact assignments that can be given to those students to do outside the class? Are there additional tasks that they can do outside the class that they can bring back and add to the portfolio? Relevant, community tasks that they accomplish in the community that they can demonstrate, they can bring back and use those kinds of things.
How can you ensure that those are CLB aligned?
Well, I think if you set up the contact assignment so that it's appropriate for the level of the students, you could probably do that. I mean, I would have to think of a particular situation. But if you were working on a module and you wanted to create some contact assignments that were sort of beyond the level of the class, that were at a higher level, I think you'd set that task just the way you would set a task that you're going to do in the classroom using the CLB. Those are kinds of things I would be looking at. Online, are there other things they can be doing online that they can bring back the evidence and put into the portfolio?
Okay, thank you. Are there any other questions? We have time for one, maybe two more questions.
So just a quick one around prep time. So am I understanding correctly that at your level, it is an accepted understanding that programs can reduce a little bit of instruction to make sure that there's enough prep time? And that's an understanding with CIC and it flows through all levels.
Let me be clear, I don't work for government, right? I'm not speaking for them. I'd be slapped down very quickly if that was a presumption. But I've heard at the national level, I've heard them say they're okay with that. I've heard the senior people say they're looking for quality of instruction. They would rather have less time in the classroom but have better time, and they recognize that role. There are already programs that do that they just put in for instructional time at 5 hours, but their teachers are in the class 4 hours. So there are already programs doing that across the country.
Thanks, Joanne. We have time for one more quick question. Okay, Todd, do you still have your microphone there? Okay. Thanks, Melissa.
Hi, I just had a question. I've been hearing, our lead teachers have been hearing talk on the forums about multi-level tasks. And my teachers are getting terrified that now in their class, which our classes predominantly are not multi-level, but they're worried that they're going to have to do, students come in, they're not at the same CLB in every skill area, right?
Yeah, right.
So they're worried that they're going to have to do multi-level tasks, and that means multiple tasks at different CLBs in their classes. Is that something that's going to happen?
I think you've captured the fact that every class is multi-level, right? Because they do come in at different levels in the skills across. And IRCC, we've introduced PBLA sort of looking at the notion of just assessing at one level. But certainly I think there's an expectation from IRCC that teachers should be able to adjust from one additional level. Right? Isn't that what you're recalling, Lisa? I see you're just wanting to jump in there. Oh, okay. So that there is a notion that you should be able to adjust your assessment tasks to include an additional level, just as a matter of course.
That's okay. That's a little different. So we're talking about adjusting, say, the task, maybe the scores on the task, rather than having a completely different task.
Yes.
Right now, there is a professional learning module that demonstrates how to do that. And in terms of, are all teachers expected to do that in a single level class? The answer is no. But it is a strategy. So for instance, when you're talking about your higher level students that are performing at a higher level, that might be one of the strategies that a teacher uses to address that for the students, so that they're teaching, let's say, CLB 6, and they know that the student is working above that. They could adjust a task for that student or group of students who are obviously performing at a higher level, so that they're assessing at 2 levels, 6 and 7. So that's one of the strategies for addressing those. And there's a professional learning module on the CCLB Moodle, yes, out now, that your lead teachers could teach to your teachers to help them understand how to do that. There's a professional learning module. AMSA did a webinar on it last year, so there's a webinar on the website somewhere. So there's support for that, but it's not expected that they have to do it. It's a strategy that is being supported.
It's certainly encouraging teachers to look at adjusting tasks so that they address more than one level. And it's often fairly easy to do because the tasks, the same task can be carried out at a variety of levels. So it's really just adjusting the criteria that you're using and knowing clearly which ones are aligned to what level. And I think that can do, there's been a project to look at multi-level module plans and instructional packages, and certainly that's going to be a boon to teachers as they can access that bank of resources going forward. But part of it too, when you have a multi-level class, encouraging the teachers to do a profile of the class and look at each skill and how many students are at this level in this skill and how many are at that level and that level, and then see where the biggest cluster is and target your assessments at least. You try and appeal to a range of levels for instruction, but look at where the clusters of levels are and target your assessment for the large clusters to kind of make the workload manageable.
Thank you, everybody. That's all the time we have for Q&A. We want to give you a chance to... One comment? Yeah?
One comment. Because I've always wanted to say this, so I just hope you don't mind if I take the opportunity to say it. I've known since I started with PBLA, way back in the beginning, that our two PBLA leads were really teacher and learner centered. I've always known that, but I don't think it's something that has been generally known to the people who have been trying to implement PBLA in their classrooms. So I was so glad to hear Joanne actually say that today. And I'd really like to thank you both, you and Tara, for really having the learner and the teacher at the center of PBLA, because I know that we could have ended up with a standardized assessment and having to teach towards a test that was not relevant to students. And so I really appreciate the fact that you are always there pushing for learners, pushing for teachers, and pushing for things like compensation and paid time and things like that. I really appreciate that, so I just want to take a chance to acknowledge it.
Thank you, Lisa. It means
Thanks,
a lot.
Lisa.
Thank you.
Let's go to the next slide. Is it this one?
Sure.
Okay, we have a little something for you, Joanne.
Oh, do you? Yeah. I'm going to run to the next ballroom and do this again.
Yeah, we'll be doing this again in the next ballroom. But I officially would like to present you with this, and thank you so much for being here and for your presentation. It was great to have you, and again, Joanne will be here all day, so let's give a warm round of applause for Joanne for being here.
Well,
thank you.
Thank you very much. Oh, nice.